Hi there. This lecture is a little different. You're not going to need to take notes on this so much. I'm not really, as some of my younger students would ask, none of this will be on the exam. But this is an idea I came up with to give you some inspiration, to encourage you to think about how you can express marketing in different levels in terms of your brand and your wine. So we're just going to dive right into it. It's remember that the 4 P's of marketing, you do remember these. This will be on the exam. Product, price, promotion, and placement. And promotion, of course, aids sales. Promotions are donations and other things, but placement. Placement is really the frame for your product. And your product looks very different, for example, if it is on the wine list at the French Laundry compared to in the bargain bin at the local Bevmo. Same product, very different placement, very different frame, and so that ultimately affects how people see your brand. So we're going to talk about 3 different elements and how this plays out in wine. We're going to talk about winery architecture, because certainly for visitors to the winery, this is a clear frame for your product. We're going to talk a little bit about labels, because labels are really a massive topic, and if we really wanted to talk about labels, we should have our own class on that. And then the third element is just pure merchandising and showing you how different brands and different stores around the world merchandise their products. So let's start with the art of making wine. And of course, if we are going to argue that making wine is an art, then perhaps our wineries should reflect this. This is a winery called Otazu in Navarra, in northern Spain. It's a fascinating place because it's a wholly contained little valley with a chapel that goes back to the 14th century and then a stately home that goes back to the 16th century. But when they wanted to build the winery, they wanted to indicate that there was a real sense of art and design involved in everything that they do. So the entire winery is full of sculpture and art. It's quite an impressive thing and really beautiful. And if you ever get a chance to visit, well worth a visit, especially when you come into that little valley and you realize, gosh, this is just about heaven. Maybe as good an example of anything on this is the new Cité du Vin in Bordeaux, the amazing wine museum in, of course, wine's most famous city, Bordeaux. And the idea here is that they wanted to not only use wine as a way to attract visitors to the city center, they wanted to use wine to rebrand the entire downtown section of Bordeaux. And so they created this museum, the Cité du Vin, the City of Wine, and it really has changed the entire outlook, the entire affect of the city of Bordeaux. Hugely famous now, hugely successful, and all because instead of just making a nice building, they really pushed the limits of what they could do and created something that's absolutely spectacular. So this is one of my favorite photographs. This is, by the way, the young woman on the right there is Silvia Fiorentini, who is the public relations manager for the Consorzio di Chianti Classico. But if you look at this photograph carefully, you will realize that the only thing that's not a mirror is the section in the middle. The artist for this installation literally set up a wall of mirrors across the property, so as you wander around the property, you see reflections of yourself. But then at key points, there are windows in the mirror, and through those windows, you look out upon the scenes of Tuscany. It's a spectacular installation. It's enormously successful. And it's really quite a wonderful way to underscore your sense that the world is a beautiful place. Wine is part of that lifestyle. Really great stuff. And here is another scene from Castello d'Ama. None of these walls are functional. These are all simply art installations. But they encourage people to get out, to wander around the grounds, to look at what's going on, and to really feel a sense of this place, this unique, walled off. In French it would be a clos. But this walled off little piece of land that is the essence of Castello d'Ama. Isios Winery in Navarra. This is by the very famous Spanish architect Calatrava. And here he wanted to create something that the winery, by the way, is owned by the Domecq family, quite famous for Tío Pepe, among other things. And he wanted to create a winery that captures also a sense of place. And so his description of the design of the winery is that it captures the crest and feeling of the mountains behind it. So as you walk into the winery, you see the winery below, and behind it you see these towering Sierra Cantabrica behind them. What's interesting is the parking lot is a long way from this winery. And so Calatrava clearly wanted to give you enough time to fully appreciate his artwork, because it feels like about a quarter of a mile walk between the parking lot as you walk towards the winery, and you see the winery in front, mountains behind, winery in front, mountains behind. Do you get it? Do you get it? Do you get it? And then you finally get to the winery. Pretty, in some ways a little funny, but a very successful design, and obviously enormously famous throughout the world. In that same part of town, or part of Spain, you have Marqués de Riscal, which is, this is not a winery, this is in fact a hotel, but it's by the very famous architect Frank Gehry, and he did this as an expression of a grapevine flowering up out of the ground, as I understand it. Very strange, very interesting, absolutely memorable. And of course, when you get here, you realize just the same way, good brand communication, if you want this, you can't get it anywhere else. When you arrive at Marqués de Riscal, there is no question, you cannot be anywhere else but Marqués de Riscal. And the hotel has been quite successful, and again, an amazing brand image for what they do. So the next time you're thinking about building a little steel building for your winery, think about what he did here with titanium. Dinastía Vivanco in Rioja as well, in the town of Briones. This has what I consider to be the best wine museum in the world. Actually, a better wine museum than the Cité du Vin. It is less interactive, it is more of a classic museum, but there's actually more information about wine here than in Cité du Vin in Bordeaux. And in keeping with their vision that wine is something to be enjoyed by the whole family, this is a collection of grapes. Yes, a bunch of grapes that lie out literally on top of the cellar, because the cellar is underground here, directly underneath the sculpture. But it's also a playground for kids. And during sunny days, you'll see the kids out frolicking on the grapes. And it's all part of their vision of how wine is an expression of our communal culture, our communal family, and should be enjoyed by one and all, even if it's with a lot of water for the little kids. In Franciacorta, fascinating region because, of course, it's very close to the art and design capital of Italy, which is Milan. And so many of the wineries are owned by some of the top executives or noble families of Milan. These are their summer estates, and they have some beautiful, beautiful wineries. And here is an example of an art exhibit inside the winery. Notice the red carpet, so that you can walk around on the red carpet, just like the fashion models. And all of these various artwork, whether it's sculpture, whether it's painting, and all the rest, all part of the winery installation, as if to say our wines, like fashion, like art, are part of a civilized lifestyle. Beautiful art here. Some of it quite strange, but that's part of good art. And back to Tuscany, we have a winery called Nitardi. Nitardi actually is a corruption or an evolution of Netardei. And Netarde literally means the nectar of the gods. What a great name for a winery. And this is owned by one of the most famous art gallery owners in all of Europe. And so he has filled his beautiful little estate in Tuscany with fabulous examples of art. And so you'll notice in the lower left, you see the wonderful lion, very traditional lion, but right behind him, quite a modern sculpture to keep the lion company. And as you enter the Nitardi winery, you see that wonderful sculpture there on the right. Clearly, once again, lets you know we're not in Kansas anymore. This must be Nitardi. And in Rioja, this is a winery by the famous French architect Mercier. It is quite spectacular in that as you see it from far away, it looks like the world's absolutely largest wine barrel sticking out of a mountain, and that's very, very intentional. In fact, those strips of windows around the outside are supposed to imitate the hoops of the barrel, and the sides are finished with big cedar planks to make it look like the oak of the barrel. And so there is a clear message that, although it's not quite as brand specific here, clear message, this is a winery, it's not anywhere else. And by the way, the inside is quite amazing because it's all set up in the round, and there are huge cranes that literally move tanks into the center and then up and down an elevator, so you can move everything in the winery without a single pump. Quite impressive, quite spectacular, and easily recognizable from literally miles away. This is another small winery in Chianti Classico, and very simple little installation. These are the ancient amphora that possibly would have carried wine around the ancient world 2,000 years ago. Here they've drawn attention to them by lifting them way up into the air on these wonderful tripods. This is all part of the picnic area. Again, all just clever. Who knows, they may have paid the designer a fabulous sum for this, but the actual structure itself is not expensive, just striking and memorable. And then we have to talk about the new Antinori winery in Chianti Classico. Again, Marchese Antinori, now given over the direction of his winery to his 3 daughters. But what you see on the left is the family tree of the Antinori. 26 or 27 generations. Must be 27 because you can see at the very, very top there are the 3 daughters there at the top of the tree. So there is a statement about tradition, there is a statement about family, there is and of course Marchese, a statement about nobility. But then on the right-hand side, you can see one of the photographs of the winery itself, which is spectacular, very modern. And so you have this wonderful juxtaposition of the ancient 27 generations of the family, yet creating modern, absolutely up-to-the-date buildings and wines to compete in the modern world. Pretty strong message for the brand. This is a winery in Mendoza, Argentina, and I love this. This is the bottom of the barrel cellar, and at the bottom you will notice it's a compass rose. This is a design or a mechanism that people who create nautical charts and maps indicate how the true magnetic north varies from true north varies from magnetic north. And so it's a little way of saying this is the key to everything. This is the key to understanding everything. But it's also a way of saying we're on the map, we're putting ourselves on the map. And of course this room is used not just to store barrels, but there are concerts, there are presentations here, all centered around this wonderful image of the key to understanding our position in the universe is the compass rose. A little more humor here. This is quite a fun winery, Carlos Creek Winery in Minnesota, by the way. But obviously the managing director of the winery is a woman, and I think you can see that this comes across in some of their signage. This is the sign to the restroom. And it of course says men to the left because women are always right. Now, that may just seem fun, but I will tell you, every day there are many, many people, scores of people who have their photographs taken in front of this sign. It's a great little bit of marketing. And obviously a huge percentage of the wine in the world is bought by women, and clearly women must feel very much at home at a winery that has a sign like this as you work your way into the restroom. Lots of fun and a really interesting winery. You should look them up. You should spend some time checking out what they do, because they really do break the mold in many ways in terms of how they sell their wine. And this last one is, I think it's just charming. This is in a winery that also serves as a wine school in Conegliano in Prosecco. And it is an ancient saying put on the wall in the 1800s, clearly Trompe l'oeil to make it look like it's an ancient sculpture or something. And aqua historiam non facit means, in fact, water doesn't make history. And this, in a wine school, I think is a wonderful message to send the students. I hope you copy this image and paste it on your forehead or something else, because you are in an industry that makes history, and water doesn't make history. In Montepulciano, the official offices of the Consortio were originally down in the village square, but over the last few years they made the decision to move up to the Fortaleza, which is the castle up at the top, very top of the hill. And when they did so, they even picked out the very tippy top of that hill as a place where they would build their tasting room. Great idea. And then as they began to dig into the soil there to lay the foundations, they discovered not only that there were ruins there, but there were ruins of Etruscans, and it was in fact the ruins of a winery. And so rather than demolishing the ruins, they literally excavated them and then covered them with glass, so that when you walk into the tasting room, what you see is, as you taste wines made in the 21st century, you are standing on the ruins of a winery that was built 2,700 years ago by the Etruscans. A spectacular way of saying, we have always made wine in this part of the world. Now let's talk about placement and promotion. Merchandising is staging. Remember, we talked about when you sell your house, you stage it. You turn on all the lights. You put some flowers on the table. You're supposed to bake cookies in the oven so the house smells yummy to people who are walking in. So that's the concept behind merchandising your wine. And of course, here's an example from Silver Oak. And notice how they present the bottles in this beautiful chunk of stone that they've hollowed out to fit the bottle. But Silver Oak, a top-selling brand and clear, wonderful design and image, and they only want their wines to be presented in the best possible light. And this is an example of how they make sure that happens. Let's first talk about labels. If your label communicates the essence of your brand, this is a pretty good label. This is Opus One, and of course it has the two partners who created the vision for Opus One and are the joint investors in Opus One, Robert Mondavi and Baron Philippe. Both have passed on to another world, but their image still lives on this label, and it's a wonderful example of how that scribble turns into a caricature or a silhouette of the two men, Bob on the left and Baron Philippe on the right, and it clearly communicates this is who we are and this is what we do. Very clever design, unlike anything else you had seen in the world at that time. You've heard me talk about Ravenswood and how good their marketing is. Here is the label design by Mr. Gaines Hall. And you can see very simple, very clean, very, it's kind of a woodcut, a Japanese woodcut. And again, the tagline for Ravenswood is no wimpy wines. This is not a wimpy label either. And so the brand image of the label successfully communicates the brand image of the brand itself. Good design, well done. Interestingly enough, designed on a cocktail napkin. Joel Peterson had talked to the designer and begged and pleaded him to come up with some designs for his label, and the designer was, let's say, unmotivated or perhaps concerned that he couldn't deliver what Joel Peterson wanted. And then one day Joel finally drove down to see him and said, look, I want to see what you're doing. And the conversation wasn't going well, and they went out to lunch, and on the back of a cocktail napkin, they literally sat down and said, look, I just want something like this. Oh, you mean like this? And the label was born. So sometimes the best way to deal with a designer is just to communicate a little more. the most popular or the most successful wine brand on the planet right now, Barefoot Cellars. And again, this is a huge, huge brand, and yet the first thing that you have to be concerned about if you're a huge, huge brand is, will you seem like an industrial wine factory with no personality and no authenticity and no real people involved? And by using Barefoot and an imprint of a human foot, you automatically give that human touch to the brand. Very clever marketing, very well executed. Of course, it started long before Gallo bought it, but Gallo has continued this very successfully. And then you have to look at Dom Perignon, because of course Dom Perignon not only has a stunning label, the label that is identifiable from across a room, but they even went so far as to create their own bottle, so that even in a dark restaurant, if you couldn't see the label, you could still see, wow, they just ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon. This is very good marketing. It works at the very top end. And again, if you remember my wine business curve, where high prices mean low quantities and high quantities mean low prices, Dom Perignon is one of those real outliers that makes 300, 400, 500,000 cases of wine, and they sell it for $170 a bottle retail. That's way up and to the right off that curve, so they're enormously successful. This is one of the reasons why. Now let's talk about how this stuff shows up in stores. I'm sure being involved in the wine industry today, you've seen these before, but this is actually a wine bar, and they offer a wide range of products from around the world, and you buy a little credit card which goes into that slot at the top, and as you buy, as you use up the card, just the same way you use up a Metro card in New York or something, you can get a certain amount of each one of these wines to taste. And so it's a self-serve way for you to taste a whole bunch of different wines, but clearly that's a very different sense of merchandising and presentation than walking into a more traditional wine bar where you've got a sommelier behind the bar who is giving you direction, instruction, all the rest. This is clearly more involving, if perhaps less educational. It's more experiential, and it certainly gives the customer more power over the decisions that they're making. So, pretty interesting idea. And this is just to show you how sometimes in wine we just take things too literally. This is a display in Italy, and it's marzipan. And you'll notice that marzipan is a candy, right? It's almond paste and sugar, basically. And you would think usually marzipan is made in the forms of little fruits or little flowers and cute little things. But this store actually did a wonderful job, bakery actually. They not only made little fish, they made, if you'll notice over on the left, octopi, artichokes, all sorts of things out of marzipan. Clearly the guy who does this, or the woman who does this, has a great sense of humor, but it also is an immediate attraction as you walk by the window to say, oh my gosh, look at this stuff. That's the essence of marketing, to say, wow, the people here are a little different, a little more creative, a little more interesting. Better go in and check out what else they do. And for those of you who think that packaging is innovative in the wine business, I would just encourage you to look at the back bar of any bar in America, and you'll notice all these strange bottle shapes and all the rest. In wine, we basically have 3 bottle shapes: the tall hock bottle, the Bordeaux bottle, the Burgundy bottle. We have basically 3 or 4 colors. You've got clear, brown, bright green, and dark green. And that's innovation in the world of wine. Real innovation means you might put a little pink on that label, whereas liqueurs are vastly more innovative in the way they market things. And this is a cherry and a plum liqueur from Croatia, and notice it's considered a product of the national patrimony, and so they bottle it in bottles that are shaped like, yep, you guessed it, Croatia. So this is a souvenir, but at the same time it is a national symbol of pride. Pretty funny. Anyone want to guess what they sell? Yeah, of course, they sell fruit smoothies. But this is their shop window every day. They set this up, and when you walk by, it is very attractive, it is very appealing, and it really gives you a sense of, oh wow, let's go in and have one of these. Great fun. And they deserve some credit. In an ancient village, you can see by the reflection in the window there a little bit. Some of this is old stonework and all the rest. This is in a very ancient part of town, but this modern, innovative design really catches your eye. Okay, yeah, I know, that was me years ago with my wife. But what I'm drawing attention to is the name Maiolini. This is a producer of Franciacorta in Italy. He has a wonderful connection to the fashion industry, and he had one of the fashion designers create this t-shirt. So you're not supposed to look at the building behind us. You're not supposed to look at my wife or me. You're just supposed to be looking at the t-shirt. But it's a great t-shirt, and I've never shown it to any group of people who didn't say, how can I get one of those? The little bubbles coming up the side and all the rest. Beautiful, beautiful shirt. And of course, it gets worn all over the world. And speaking of Maiolini, he has a relationship with the fashion industry. He works with young fashion designers in Milan, and each year he has a competition, and he invites one of them to create dresses for his bottles. In this case, here are the 6 products that he makes, and in each one of the 6 products, it gets its own color of a glamorous coat designed by one of the young fashion designers. And then, of course, he sells these bottles for a real premium from time to time. And this is a previous version, and in this case the fashion designer decided that he would do ball gowns. And of course what I love about this is not only the whole concept of Milan fashion Franciacorta, but in this case the dress really captures that effervescence, that flowing nature of Franciacorta. On the other hand, another producer in Franciacorta, this one going a much more traditional route. These are the bicycles, because the winery is spread out over 3 buildings across a series of hills in Franciacorta. These are the bicycles that the employees use to carry things from one location to the other. And I just love the basic sense of this. It brings to mind that ancient handcrafted world where wine bottles were delivered in little hand trucks or by cart and horse and wagon or whatever to the little wine shops. It's a way of saying that even though we make some of the most modern and spectacular wines of the world, we still have this sense of tradition and old world style and handcrafting. Another Franciacorta. This one is particularly interesting because if you look at the image on the wall, that is it's Umani Ronchi is the brand name. That's their logo, and you think, gosh, that's a strange logo. Why would you do that? And then if you look carefully at the bottles stacked below, of course, part of the process of using the traditional method of making sparkling wine is that you need to leave the bottles on the lees for months or years. And as you do so, they're always stacked in this very specific way, end to end, and one tier over the other, and it creates this pattern. So on the right, you have the punt end of the bottle in the logo, and you can see the bottom rim and then the deep indentation of the punt. But then on the left-hand side, you see, admittedly rotated 90 degrees, the bottle cap in the middle, and the space between the bottles being the dark section of that. And so the two together create the brand of Umani Ronchi. Very clever because it talks about how they make their wine. They are absolutely the classic method. This is the ballroom at the Drake Hotel in Chicago. It is a spectacular room. Notice that on the pillars, those are grapevines scaling the pillars. And this is a trade tasting in Chicago for about 600 of the top trade and chateau owners from all over, all the great chateaus of Bordeaux. And again, when they hire a room to host this tasting, they're not just interested in a conference center. They absolutely insist that it has to be something spectacular. There's a reason they always do the Drake, and it's because this room captures the absolute message they want to send about the Grand Cru de Bordeaux. And I just included this because it is sometimes so sad for me to go to a supermarket in America and see how we display food, and then go to Europe and see how they display some of the things they have to sell. This just seems so much more attractive and so much more fun to shop in a place like this. And I wish we had more of this kind of merchandising in America. I'm sure there are health codes against it, particularly in the time of coronavirus, but even so, what a spectacular effort. And these folks spend hours setting this stuff up. This isn't just a question of somebody throwing a bunch of cans on a shelf. This is really creating artwork with your merchandise. Again, can this be done with wine? I think it can. These are tapas in a Spanish restaurant in the north in Bilbao. And again, beautifully, beautifully displayed. Remember those beautiful coats in Franciacorta? Doesn't look much different than this, does it? Beautifully illuminated. They look like works of art. No wonder this part of Spain has huge fame for being the absolute center of gastronomy, particularly for tapas and things. Great presentation of a product. And I love this because I bought this, well, my wife and I both got an ice cream cone, and this is in Budapest. And instead of just giving you an ice cream cone, slop 2 cones, or slop 2 balls on a cone and hand it to you, the ice cream merchant here was doing an absolute land office business. He had a long line out the shop because when you got the ice cream, it's the same ice cream as everywhere else, but you got it that he had created a rose out of the ice cream. Spectacular example of how merchandising absolutely adds value and changes the perception of the product. So can we display wine in a more attractive way? Here's one way where the bottles are displayed, in my mind, a little brightly lit, particularly the top row. But you know, in the States, we tend to display our bottles not so much with elegance, but with big stickers saying "marked down 20%." Or and here's an example of how they sell wine more as art and less as a commodity. One of the most famous wines of the world, Tokai, and they have, to me, one of the great taglines, Vinum Regum Rex Vinorum, the wine of kings and the king of wines. And these signs are in good wine shops, just the same way that every diner has a Coca-Cola sign in the States. This, in great wine shops, they give this sign to people who sell Tokai to remind people this is absolutely one of the greatest wines of the world since 1631. So there's the frame for your wine in a wine shop in the States, right? Doesn't that look elegant? Does that look like the way we sell art? Or does it look like the way we sell, gosh, I don't know, secondhand shirts or something? Really doesn't convey an image of quality and style. And this, to me, is one of the big issues as you bring your wine to market. Where do you want your wine to be seen? How do you want it to be seen? Well, those are questions you need to answer. And if you are trying to give a specific image or style to your wine, seems to me that you may want to avoid some of the displays like this. Instead, you might look at a wine shop that does this. This is pretty nice presentation of wine. This is a wine bar in Italy, and you can see they clearly think that what they are offering is a work of art, and they present it as such, and as a result, their customers certainly perceive it as such. This is much more successful merchandising. So in summary, nice, neat, simple concept. How you say something is as important as what you say, or as Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. When you think about how your product is going to be perceived, you need to think about the winery, you need to think about the label, you need to think about the parking lot, you need to think about where it's going to be seen, how it's going to be seen. All of that will ultimately determine how people think of your product, and that is, after all, what marketing is all about.